Welcome, the most captivating science fiction stories where mystery, action, and love intertwine are here. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song of bureaucratic tedium, casting everything in that particular shade of institu- The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song of bureaucratic tedium, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional beige that made even hope look jaundiced. Zara pressed her back against the cold metal wall, her elongated ears twitching at every sound that echoed through the sterile corridors. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. She had counted every one, marking time not by sunrise or sunset, luxuries she barely remembered, but by the rhythmic cycling of the air recyclers and the predictable shuffle of Dr. Kellaway's sensible shoes. Subject displays increased agitation during morning cycles, came the familiar voice from around the corner, followed by the scratch of stylus against tablet. Neural pathways remain active despite sedation protocols. Zara almost snorted. Agitation. As if being caged like some exotic pet was merely a minor inconvenience, like getting the wrong flavor of yogurt at breakfast. Though considering the gray nutrient paste they served here, even the wrong flavor of yogurt would have been a blessed improvement. The facility stretched endlessly beneath the Nevada desert, a labyrinth of laboratories and living quarters that housed humanity's most classified ambitions. Project Mindbridge, they called it, though Zara suspected that particular bit of corporate poetry came from the same creative minds that had labeled her cell a residential accommodation unit. She had long since mapped every corridor through forced participation in their tests, her telepathic abilities making her an unwilling partner to every piece of alien technology they dragged before her. A gentle chime echoed through the complex, followed by the mechanical voice of the facility's AI assistant. "Good morning, staff. Today's cafeteria special is Salisbury steak with mushroom gravy. Please remember that the coffee machine in Section C is still experiencing existential dread and may require emotional support before dispensing beverages." Even the artificial intelligence had developed a sense of humor down here. Zara wondered if prolonged exposure to human bureaucracy did that to all sentient beings, or if this particular AI had simply cracked under the pressure of trying to make institutional coffee palatable. Her musings were interrupted by the familiar sound of approaching footsteps. Dr. Sarah Kellaway rounded the corner with her usual entourage of clipboard-wielding assistants and stone-faced security guards. The woman had the particular look of someone who had spent too many years believing her own press releases. Sharp suit, sharper smile, and the dead eyes of middle management. "Good morning, Zara," Kellaway said, as if they were neighbors meeting over a picket fence instead of captor and prisoner meeting in an underground bunker. "Ready for today's session?" "Oh, absolutely thrilled," Zara replied, her voice carrying just enough sarcasm to dance on the edge of insubordination. "I was just thinking how much I missed having electrodes attached to my cranium. It's been almost 8 hours." One of the younger assistants made a note on his tablet, probably recording her attitude fluctuations, or some equally clinical description of basic human dignity refusing to die. They walked through corridors lined with observation windows, behind which various pieces of alien technology sat like museum exhibits. A crystalline data core pulsed with soft blue light, its surface covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. A metallic sphere hovered silently in its containment field, occasionally emitting harmonics that made nearby electronics hiccup. And there, in the largest chamber, sat the prize of their collection, a partially reconstructed alien vessel that resembled nothing so much as a chrome teardrop frozen in time. "The neural interface showed remarkable progress yesterday," Kellaway was saying, her voice taking on that particular tone academics used when discussing their favorite research subjects. "We're finally beginning to understand how your cognitive patterns interact with the quantum matrices." Zara nodded along, having learned that showing interest in their work earned her slightly better treatment. What Kellaway didn't know was that every session, every connection to alien technology, had been teaching Zara far more than her captors realized. The machines didn't just respond to her thoughts, they remembered her, recognized her as something beyond human understanding, and had slowly begun to whisper their secrets. They entered the main laboratory, a circular chamber dominated by a chair that looked like it had been designed by someone with a very specific fetish for restraining extraterrestrial beings. Cables snaked across the floor like technological ivy, connecting to banks of monitors that would soon display the intimate details of her neural activity in cheerful graphs and charts. "Doctor," Kellaway called one of the technicians from across the room, "we're getting some unusual readings from the quantum resonance chamber. The coffee machine in the break room has started speaking in what sounds like ancient Sumerian." Kellaway paused, stylus hovering over her tablet. "Is it still dispensing coffee?" "Well, yes, but it keeps asking for tribute to Enlil before it will make espresso. Make a note to have it look at it after lunch. We can't afford any delays in the caffeine supply chain." Zara found herself genuinely impressed by humanity's ability to prioritize. Even in the face of potentially world-changing alien contact, the real crisis was always the possibility of running out of coffee. There was something almost admirable about such focused dedication to the mundane. As they began the familiar routine of preparing her for neural interface, Zara felt the subtle change in the facility's electromagnetic field that had become her early warning system. Something was different today. The alien technologies weren't just humming their usual songs, they were harmonizing, building towards something that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. "Initiating primary connection," announced a technician, his voice carrying the bored professionalism of someone who had done this exact procedure hundreds of times. The neural crown descended, its delicate probes finding the access points behind her distinctive ears with practiced precision. Immediately, Zara felt the familiar rush of alien consciousness touching her mind, but today it came with an urgency she had never experienced before. The machines were trying to tell her something, their digital voices overlapping in a symphony of warning and opportunity. "Readings are nominal," called out another technician. "Subject's neural activity is within expected parameters." If only they knew that expected parameters meant she was currently having a telepathic conversation with every piece of alien technology in the facility, all of whom seemed very interested in discussing the structural weaknesses of human security systems. The desert sunrise painted the landscape in shades of amber and rust, colors that Zara had forgotten existed during her years beneath artificial lights. Her bare feet had already begun to blister against the sand, but she pressed forward, driven by a freedom so intoxicating it almost made the pain bearable. Almost. The facility's emergency klaxons had finally died away behind her, replaced by the alien sounds of wind and distant bird calls that her enhanced hearing picked up with startling clarity. Every shadow could hide a pursuit drone, every rock formation might conceal tracking equipment, yet for the first time in over 3 years, Zara felt something approaching hope. The escape had been messier than planned, involving a power surge, 2 confused janitor droids who apparently couldn't tell the difference between a fire drill and an alien breakout, and one very unfortunate incident with the cafeteria's experimental smoothie dispenser. She suspected the purple stains on her stolen lab coat would be visible from orbit. Her telepathic abilities, still recovering from the neural suppressants, reached out tentatively to scan for signs of pursuit. Instead of government agents, she found a roadrunner having an existential crisis about the meaning of perpetual motion, and a coyote who seemed convinced that the local jackrabbit population was plotting against him. The desert, it appeared, was full of paranoid wildlife. She could relate. The highway materialized through the heat shimmer like a mirage made real, a ribbon of asphalt that promised civilization and all its chaotic possibilities. Zara's stolen security badge had gotten her through the outer perimeter, but now she faced a new challenge. Looking human enough to pass casual inspection, while sporting ears that belonged in a fantasy novel and skin, so pale it practically glowed in the desert sun. She pulled the lab coat's hood up, trying to ignore how the synthetic fabric trapped heat like a personal sauna. The first vehicle to appear was a massive semi-truck hauling what looked like either furniture or the world's most boring alien invasion fleet. The driver barely glanced at her as he rumbled past, probably assuming she was just another desert casualty of poor life choices and GPS malfunctions. The next vehicle, however, slowed down. A battered pickup truck painted in what had once been blue, but now resembled the color of old bruises, pulled over with a squeal of brakes that suggested mechanical problems and possibly a drinking habit. The driver leaned out the window, revealing a face weathered by sun and seasoned, with the kind of stubble that came from forgetting to shave rather than making a fashion statement. "You okay there?" he called out, his voice carrying the particular blend of concern and wariness that desert dwellers reserved for stranded strangers. "You look like you've been wrestling with a tumbleweed and lost." Zara hesitated, her traumatized mind cataloging all the ways this could go wrong. But the alternative was continuing her trek across Death Valley's younger sibling, wearing stolen clothes and sporting skin that would soon match her lab coat's previous occupant. "I could use a ride," she said finally, keeping her voice steady despite the way her hands shook. "Hop in," the man said, reaching across to push open the passenger door. "Name's Jake Morrison. And before you ask, no, I'm not a serial killer. I'm just a guy with questionable taste in vehicles and an inexplicable fondness for picking up desert casualties." The truck's interior smelled like motor oil, coffee, and something that might have been optimism if optimism had a scent. Jake wore clothes that suggested he worked with his hands, faded jeans, a t-shirt advertising a company that probably hadn't existed since the 90s, and boots that had seen enough action to qualify for veteran status. "So," Jake said as they pulled back onto the highway, "what's your story? Alien abduction, scientific experiment gone wrong, really bad camping trip?" Zara's laugh came out more like a strangled cough. "Would you believe all of the above?" "In this part of Nevada? Absolutely. Last month I had to help a guy whose GPS tried to navigate him through a military testing ground because it insisted there was a Starbucks in the middle of Area 50. The coffee maker gurgled its final death rattle at precisely 6:30 in the morning, which Jake declared was either perfect timing or a conspiracy orchestrated by the kitchen appliances. Zara had been living above the garage for 5 days, and she was beginning to suspect that Jake's relationship with mechanical devices bordered on the supernatural. Not in a good way. "I swear this thing has it out for me," Jake muttered, prodding the silent machine with a screwdriver. "Yesterday it made perfect coffee. This morning it sounds like it's trying to communicate with the mothership." "Maybe it is," Zara said from her perch by the window, where she had been monitoring the morning radio chatter for any signs that her former captors had tracked her down. "Your toaster has been beeping in what sounds suspiciously like Morse code." "That's not Morse code, that's just its way of expressing disappointment in my choice of bread. Even the appliances in this place have standards." The past few days had settled into an oddly domestic routine that felt both surreal and comforting. Jake would rise before dawn to tinker with whatever mechanical patient currently occupied his garage, while Zara would position herself at various windows, using her slowly recovering telepathic abilities to scan for threats. Her enhanced hearing picked up conversations from the diner 3 blocks away, where the local sheriff apparently believed that the recent uptick in military helicopters was related to a top-secret project involving armored tumbleweeds. "You know what I love about small towns," Jake said, abandoning the coffee maker in favor of instant coffee that looked like it had been manufactured sometime during the Eisenhower administration. "Everyone's got a theory about everything, and they're all equally ridiculous. Zara had learned that Jake possessed an almost supernatural ability to find humor in chaos, treating her presence not as an imposition, but as an interesting puzzle to solve. He had accepted her story about government experiments with the same casual equanimity that he approached a transmission rebuild. Just another challenge that required patience, creativity, and possibly more coffee than was medically advisable. Speaking of theories, Jake continued, settling beside her at the small table that served as both dining surface and impromptu workbench. Mrs. Chen from the grocery store thinks you're either a federal agent investigating cattle mutations or a time traveler from the disco era. She's not sure which would be worse for property values. What did you tell her? That you're my cousin from back east, who's recovering from a bad relationship with a mime. People around here respect the trauma that silent performance art can inflict on the human psyche. The radio crackled with the morning news, delivered by DJ Bobby Stardust Martinez, whose enthusiasm for conspiracy theories was matched only by his questionable taste in classic rock transitions. Today's program featured a heated debate about whether the increased helicopter activity was related to alien contact, or just the government's ongoing war against feral GPS systems. Folks, I'm telling you, those navigation satellites are getting uppity, Bobby's voice proclaimed through the static. My cousin's GPS tried to route him through a McDonald's drive-thru that's been closed since 2003. That's not a glitch, that's a cry for help. Zara found herself genuinely entertained by the local radio personalities' creative interpretations of current events. If only he knew that his wildest theories barely scratched the surface of reality's actual weirdness. Her amusement was interrupted by a familiar sensation, the telepathic equivalent of someone walking over her grave. Her enhanced hearing picked up the distant sound of helicopter rotors, still miles away but approaching with the purposeful rhythm that meant business rather than pleasure. "Jake," she said quietly, her voice carrying the particular tension that had become their signal for potential trouble. He was already moving, crossing to the window with the fluid motion of someone who had learned to trust his partner's instincts. How many? 2 aircraft, maybe 3 miles out and closing. Zara's telepathic range was still limited, but she could sense the focused intensity of minds trained for search operations. They're not tourists. Right. Jake disappeared into what he optimistically called his closet, but what resembled a supply depot for someone preparing for either the apocalypse or a really challenging camping trip. He emerged with a device that looked like a radio crossed with a toaster, and had probably been assembled from spare parts in pure stubbornness. "What is that?" "Emergency broadcast scrambler," Jake said with the pride of someone unveiling their greatest creation. "Built it during my paranoid phase after watching too many movies about government surveillance. Turns out paranoia is just good planning with better marketing." He activated the device, which immediately began emitting a low hum that made Zara's teeth ache. The effect on local electronics was immediate and chaotic. Car alarms began wailing throughout the town. The radio dissolved into static that sounded vaguely like alien languages. And somewhere in the distance, what sounded like a microwave was attempting to play the national anthem. "That should buy us some time," Jake said with satisfaction. "Hard to track someone when every piece of electronic equipment in a 5-mile radius is having a collective nervous breakdown." The approaching helicopters wavered in their flight pattern, their navigation systems presumably joining the local electronic rebellion. Zara watched through the window as they circled the town like mechanical vultures, unable to lock onto their target but unwilling to give up the hunt. "They'll land and search on foot," she said, recognizing the tactical shift in their approach. "Yeah, probably. Good thing small desert towns are famous for their cooperative attitudes toward federal agents asking nosy questions." Jake grinned with the particular satisfaction of someone who had grown up in a place where privacy was considered a constitutional right, and busybodies were considered a form of pollution. True to form, the town's response to the arrival of government helicopters was immediate and creative. Mrs. Chen positioned herself on her grocery store's front porch with a lawn chair and a pair of binoculars, apparently conducting her own surveillance of the surveillance team. The local mechanic began working on a car engine with tools that were probably 3 decibels louder than necessary. And from the diner came the sound of Dolly Parton at a volume that suggested patriotic resistance through aggressive country music. Dr. Sarah Kellaway, Zara said suddenly, the name appearing in her mind like an unwelcome memory. She's here. Jake's expression shifted from amused to serious. The woman from your government vacation. She's the one who designed the neural interface protocols. She considers me her greatest professional achievement. Zara's voice carried years of accumulated anger and fear. She's also probably told her superiors that I'm some kind of dangerous weapon, rather than just someone who wants to be left alone. Well, that's inconvenient. Jake studied the approaching aircraft with the calculating expression he usually reserved for particularly challenging engine problems. Question is, do we run or do we make our stand here? Before Zara could answer, her telepathic abilities picked up something that made her laugh despite the circumstances. The lead helicopter's pilot was currently engaged in a heated mental argument with his navigation system, which insisted they were flying over a Starbucks in downtown Las Vegas. His co-pilot was wondering whether the electronic interference was natural, artificial, or possibly the result of alien technology, while simultaneously hoping they would finish this mission in time for his daughter's soccer game. "Jake," she said, grinning with the kind of manic humor that came from discovering your enemies were just as confused as everyone else, "I think your scrambler is working better than you planned." "Good, because I've got an idea that's either brilliant or completely insane, and I'm not entirely sure which." The brilliant plan, as it turned out, involved Jake's collection of spare electromagnetic coils, 3 car batteries that had seen better decades, and what appeared to be the electronic guts of every defunct appliance in a 50-mile radius. Zara watched from the garage's back room as he assembled his masterpiece, with the focused intensity of a mad scientist who had discovered that madness was just creativity with better marketing. "The beauty of small-town paranoia," Jake explained, connecting wires with the casual confidence of someone who had never met an electrical code he couldn't creatively reinterpret, "is that everyone assumes you're building something completely different from what you're actually building." Dr. Kellaway's team had landed 30 minutes ago, and their systematic search of the town was proceeding with the methodical efficiency of people who had done this many times before. Zara could sense their frustration through her telepathic abilities. Every electronic device they tried to use either malfunctioned spectacularly or began playing what sounded like elevator music performed by caffeinated dolphins. "They're getting closer," she reported, watching through the window as agents questioned Mrs. Chen, who was apparently providing them with detailed directions to 3 different locations, none of which existed. "Doctor." Kellaway is getting impatient. "Good, impatient people make mistakes." Jake activated his latest creation, which immediately began humming with the kind of energy that made the air itself feel electric. And this little beauty should give her something to really be impatient about. The device looked like it had been conceived during a fever dream involving Tesla coils and kitchen appliances, but the effect was immediate and dramatic. Every piece of alien technology that Dr. Kellaway's team carried began responding to Zara's presence, not with the subtle whispers she was accustomed to, but with what could only be described as electronic shouting. "What did you do?" Zara asked, feeling the familiar sensation of alien consciousness touching her mind, but amplified to a degree that made her ears ring. "Remember how you told me the alien tech recognizes you? Well, I figured if you were going to have a telepathic conversation with their equipment, you might as well make sure everyone could hear both sides." "The results were spectacular, Dr. Kellaway's handheld scanners began displaying readouts in languages that didn't exist, while her communication devices started broadcasting what sounded like alien poetry recited by very emotional robots. Her team's vehicles simultaneously began playing the complete works of an extraterrestrial composer who apparently specialized in automotive percussion. "This is Agent Martinez," crackled a confused voice over the radio that Jake had tuned to the government frequency. "My equipment is either malfunctioning or trying to teach me advanced calculus, requesting technical support or possibly an exorcist." Zara found herself laughing for the first time since her escape, not the bitter humor of survival, but genuine amusement at the chaos unfolding around them. The alien technologies were enjoying themselves, freed from their usual constraint of subtle communication, and allowed to express their opinions about their treatment with the enthusiasm of artists finally given a proper stage. "Dr. Kellaway to all units," came the familiar voice, tight with professional frustration. "Disregard equipment malfunctions. Continue search using visual confirmation only. The subject is here." "Time for Phase 2, Jake announced, producing a device that looked suspiciously like a modified smartphone attached to a small satellite dish. "Remember that story you told me about the facility's illegal experiments?" Zara nodded, understanding immediately. Jake had spent the past few days not just providing shelter, but carefully documenting everything she had told him about her captivity. The neural interface sessions, the violation of her basic rights, the cover-up that had kept her imprisonment secret from oversight committees. Turns out the internet is really interested in government conspiracy stories, especially when they come with supporting evidence and alien technology that's literally singing the truth. Jake's grin was the satisfied expression of someone who had just discovered that revenge was a dish best served with proper documentation and a really good wireless connection. The broadcast began immediately, uploading to every social media platform, news outlet, and conspiracy theory forum that Jake had managed to identify during his own years of healthy paranoia about government overreach. The alien technology, delighted to finally have an audience, provided real-time verification of every claim, creating feedback loops that made Dr. Kellaway's equipment broadcast the evidence of their own crimes. "This is brilliant," Zara said, watching through her telepathic connection as Dr. Kellaway's team received increasingly frantic calls from their superiors. "They can't suppress a story that's being verified by the very technology they used to commit the crimes." "Plus," Jake added with satisfaction, "every time they try to shut down the broadcast, your alien friends start singing louder. I've never seen equipment so enthusiastic about testifying against its